Aldi wines? I've never tried them before. Why? Really? All right. Well, let me check them out and I'll get back to you. All right, bye. So here's the deal today. One of my buddies is throwing a fundraiser and he's got a very limited budget. The catering came in way over budget. He asked me if it would be a good idea for him to try to salvage the budget by buying wine for the event from Aldi. All right, so I'm here at Aldi. I'm going to go in, check out the wine aisle, and see if there might be something appropriate. So let's go in. So I'm evaluating the options. We have a Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand for $8.99. This one has a score of 91 points from someone, but I'm not sure exactly who. And here we have a winking Owl Shiraz. It has a critter on the front in the form of an owl, so it leads you to suspect it may be from Australia, but it's actually from California. This particular wine is only $2.95, so we're going to give this one a shot. This Dancing Flame Red Blend from Chile is only about $5.99 a bottle. So we're going to go ahead and give this a try. There's oftentimes some good value to be had in Chile. Since it's still warm in Texas, I'm going to try a sparkling wine. This is a California extra dry sparkling wine that appears to come from Paso Robles and has a score of 88 points from the same Beverage Institute. Here we have something called a Highway 5 California Merlot, which is from the smoke-filled 2020 vintage. They do appear to have some limited edition premium buys, but I'm not sure that my friend will be able to find these at his location or that he'd be able to get them in sufficient quantity for his event. So I'm not going to get any of those. But it looks like they do have a Chardonnay from the same producer that makes the premium limited edition wine. This one's only $6.99 and it appears to have 88 points again from the same ratings agency. So with that we have about 6 bottles, so I think that gives me enough to go on. There's a variety of white, red, and sparkling. So let's go back and give them a try. Okay, so we're ready for the tasting, but before we begin, just a couple quick background points. Aldi is classified as a deep discounter, so it's somewhat like a supermarket, except they have much lower prices. They accomplish those lower prices by focusing more on volume and lower profit margins. The scores referenced in this episode come from something called the Beverage Testing Institute. Apparently, these scores come from a panelist that consists of retailers, restaurateurs, and prominent writers. This organization is proud of the fact that they don't take any advertising revenue, and also that their testing methods minimize so-called external factors. However, I do note that their website has a mantra that states, "Get reviewed, win awards, move cases." Okay, with that we're ready to get into the tasting. And the first wine I have here is the Burlwood Cellars California Sparkling Wine. This is an extra dry sparkling wine that sells for $4.99. Extra dry means that it actually has some sweetness to it, more sweetness than a Brut, for example. This wine received 88 points from the Beverage Testing Institute, and according to their scale, this means that it's highly recommended. On first nose, this reminds me a bit of a hybrid between an entry-level cava and a Prosecco. I can definitely detect the sweetness, the residual sugar. There's certainly also some apple. I'm getting a bit like an apple cider type descriptor. Maybe a little bit of candied lemon. It's a little bit smoky like I can sometimes get with some cava that has some macabeo in it. Interestingly, they have this screw cap as well. And when you unscrew it, it actually makes a popping noise, much like if you were popping a cork. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So there is some decent acidity to this wine. It seems to be fairly balanced. There's nothing offensive about it. It's definitely a simple wine and certainly not very complex. If I was to rate this wine according to the WSET or Wine Spirit Education Trust grading system, I would have to say it's at least acceptable. I definitely don't highly recommend it like the Beverage Testing Institute. However, with respect to the use that my friend has for this wine, that is using it at a large event as the sparkling wine alternative, I think it may work quite well. He could get an entire case of this wine for only $60, and so I think he could get away with serving this without having a revolt on his hands, and most people would probably accept it. The next wine I'll be tasting is the 2020 Highway 5 Merlot. This wine comes in at 12.5% alcohol by volume. There's not much known about this wine. However, it does appear that it was bottled and vinted in Modesto, California. And I will note that E&J Gallo, one of the biggest wine conglomerates in the entire world, is based in Modesto, California. And so it wouldn't surprise me if they were the ones responsible for this wine. This one sells for $4.99 a bottle, so certainly a very favorable price. This wine does have some dark cherry descriptors and perhaps some spice and a little bit of vanilla, but my biggest concern with this wine is that it suffers from some smoke taint. 2020 was a very bad vintage throughout the wine growing regions in California. This particular wine has a bit of an ashtray sensation on the finish, and it's really quite unpleasant, and one that I wouldn't recommend. So for that reason, it definitely gets a thumbs down from me. Next up is a white wine, specifically the 2021 Single Estate Sauvignon Blanc. This one sells for $8.99. It has 12.5% alcohol by volume. It was actually given a 91-point rating by the Beverage Testing Institute, and 91 points corresponds to an exceptional rating from them. This one is a Marlborough, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. Of course, Marlborough is an exceptional area for making high-quality Sauvignon Blanc. This wine definitely has the pronounced aromatic intensity that you would expect with a Sauvignon Blanc from Marlborough, New Zealand. Specifically, I'm getting a lot of grassy herbaceous notes, some tropical fruits, some gooseberry. So it's definitely typical of what you'd expect for a Marlborough, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. On the palate, it's consistent with the aromatics. There's definitely some high acidity, like you'd expect with a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. The finish is a little bit short and maybe has a little bit of bitterness to it, though. So that would perhaps prevent my rating from being higher for this wine. Nevertheless, it is a typical expression of Marlborough, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. Again, this is a balanced wine, but given the problems with the shortness of the finish and the bitterness on the finish, I could not agree with the 91-point rating that it received from the Beverage Testing Institute. Instead, I would probably call it about an 85. If I was using the WSET scale, I would probably call it good, which is certainly a step up from acceptable. It's certainly an excellent value for $8.99 and one that is definitely worth considering. So I'm certainly going to recommend this wine. Next up is the Winking Owl Shiraz, which comes from California. This wine checks in at about 13.5% alcohol by volume. Shiraz is one of my favorite varietals, so I was particularly intrigued by this wine, especially given the price point. This wine is less than $3 a bottle, and so you certainly can't beat that. While there wasn't a whole lot of information online, I did note that there was a registered trademark indication on the label. And so using my legal skills, I did a little bit of research on the USPTO website and tracked down a trademark registration for Winking Owl to E&J Gallo. And so I know for a fact that E&J Gallo is responsible for this wine. The other interesting thing is that there was no vintage on the label. So that means that they could be using a blend of multiple different vintages for this particular bottling. The first time I smelled this wine, I got kind of an avalanche of cinnamon roll type descriptors. There was a lot of sweet fruit and cinnamon characteristics on it, and it was really pretty pleasant as soon as I smelled it. But now that it's been open for a little while, a lot of that pleasantness has blown off. And now I'm getting a little bit more of the ashtray and the drying short finish that I was getting with a Highway 5 Merlot. And especially given the fact that this is a multi-vintage blend, my concern is that perhaps they're using a bunch of the 2020 fruit that suffered from smoke taint, and they're kind of diluting it with maybe a little bit of fruit from 2019 or some fruit from 2021, and then just trying to disguise the flaws associated with that 2020 fruit. In any event, this is another wine that's unpleasant, and even for $3, I don't think I would want to drink this wine. So unfortunately for me, this one also gets a thumbs down. Next, we have another white wine, which could be a good thing the way this tasting has gone so far. Specifically, I'm tasting the 2019 William Wright Chardonnay from Monterey County, California. Monterey County is near the coast in the Pacific Ocean, and so it receives lots of cooling influences, which is a good thing for Chardonnay. Chardonnay does best in cool climates. I'm also encouraged by the fact that this wine has a Monterey County designation rather than a California designation, as that means that at least 75% of the fruit came from Monterey County. This is a full-bodied wine that clocks in at about 13.5% alcohol by volume. The color is quite dark, probably medium gold if I was to assess it. This wine sells for $6.99. This wine is highly acclaimed. Specifically, it received an 88-point rating from the Beverage Testing Institute, and it's also highly regarded by wine enthusiasts, which rates it as a best buy. I'm getting a lot of tropical fruit notes and also a little bit of caramel. There's definitely a buttery, creamy sensation to it. There's pronounced flavor intensity. The acidity is a little bit lower than you might expect given the fact that this wine is from a cooler climate, and so that's a little bit troubling. Nevertheless, for this price point, you really can't go wrong. This wine is certainly varietally correct. I would probably rate it a good, and I'm not sure that I would go so high as to highly recommend it, but I definitely think it's a little bit better than the Sauvignon Blanc I evaluated earlier. It's easily a thumbs up recommendation, and certainly at the $6.99 per bottle price point, you can't go wrong with this wine. Next up is a red wine, specifically the 2021 Dancing Flame, which comes from the Central Valley in Chile. This Dancing Flame received an 89-point score from the Beverage Testing Institute. It also received a silver medal from them, which appears on the front of the label. The other thing I found on the label was actually an identification of the producer. So this is not a pure private label wine, and this producer was not ashamed of this wine and came right out and identified itself on the label. This leads me to believe that the producer may actually be proud of this wine and is an encouraging sign with respect to the potential quality of this wine. This is a full-bodied dry red wine. It's a red blend that consists of 70% Cabernet Sauvignon, 20% Carmenere, and 10% Syrah. This wine sells for only $5.99 per bottle, so it's certainly very affordable. I'm getting lots of blackberry, dark cherry, a little bit of spice, definitely more purity of fruit than I was getting with the two earlier red wines. It's definitely fruit forward. I'm not getting a lot of oak or artificial oak qualities to it, like from oak chips. If I had a criticism of this wine, I think maybe it's a little bit thin and light for a Cabernet Sauvignon, but at this price point, you certainly can't go wrong with it. I definitely recommend this wine and think it's a thumbs up. If you're interested in more top wine values, be sure to check out this video where I go to the wine store and pick wine off the shelves that I recommend.